Sholto Burns amat lantang dan langsung tidak berselindung dalam menyatakan pandangannya mengenai cara media asing membuat liputan pilihan raya umum ke-14. Sebagai pengulas dan penganalisis dengan lebih 20 tahun pengalaman dalam bidang kewartawanan, Burns meneruskan fokusnya kepada ketidakadilan semula jadi media asing terhadap kerajaan tetapi bersikap sebaliknya terhadap pembangkang. Dalam wawancara bersama Syed Umar Arif dan Nurlila Zulkifli, beliau mempersoalkan kredibiliti liputan isu seperti BRIM, GST, 1MDB, Derma Arab Saudi kepada kerajaan Malaysia serta siasatan luar biasa Jabatan Keadilan Amerika Syarikat. Burns adalah fellow kanan Institut Kajian Strategik dan Antarabangsa ISIS. Ikuti wawancara penuh dalam BH Ahad.
Now, I speak as someone who was a full-time journalist in Britain for 20 years. Worked for a series of what we still call Fleet Street publications, The Independent, The Evening Standard, Sunday Telegraph, New Statesman, and I've written for lots of other publications too. When they're covering a country like Malaysia, there's probably very few people on the staff who really know very much about the country. And they're not going to write about the country all the time either. So when something comes up that is big enough to make the foreign pages, there is often a very black and white way of looking at the country. And so the paradigm that was set with Malaysia really was in 1998 and 2000. Anwar's fall from grace, the trials, going to prison. And what a lot of Western, I say Western media, I mean, basically when we talk about international media, really we mean Western media. Because the only other ones are outliers now. I mean, there's Al Jazeera now, or there's Russia Today. And they may be worth watching for their own reasons, but really we're talking about, we're talking about the New York Times or the Financial Times or these kind of papers. They are all Western papers, or BBC, CNN. And so what they would do in a situation like that, they would say, okay, and I think it really is that simple. It's a question of who are we going to support and who are we going to criticize? It's like, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And the way the Western media saw it right then, they disapproved very strongly of the way Dr. Mahathir treated Anwar. So he and the BN became the bad guys. They saw Anwar as being, in their eyes, a kind of liberal reformist. And so from then on, it's always been Anwar and anyone associated with him, they're all the good guys. Now they didn't, that's a very unnuanced way of looking at it, There are very few Western journalists who said, okay, so if Anwar is a liberal reformer, what about his group, his background as an Islamist youth leader? If he's a liberal reformer, what about his role in removing English from the education system? What about his role as well, he was more than a warlord, really, wasn't he? But a kind of big cheese in UMNO. Someone who, if he hadn't struck so early, may have won the prize of being the Prime Minister within UMNO. Someone who only just became a reformer after he got sacked. So there isn't any kind of delving into that. And I think in the years since, this is really where the Western media starts when they look at Malaysia. They still think, okay, who are these guys still around? Anwar, he's back in prison again. So we're still going to root for him and all the people who are with him. And who's put him in jail? This is how they would see it. They say, oh, BM put him into jail. So we're going to criticize that. And so that kind of, the whole position from where they're starting is, it's not really a level playing field. If you think of every way that you could caricature the BN government in a negative way, that's how they view it. So that's what you're dealing with to begin with. And so when you're talking about the coverage of this election, for instance, they are going to be coming from a perspective that says, we don't think it's fair anyway. And the other thing there too is that has to be said that the opposition has been very, very good in reaching out to Western media. And my problem with that would be that an awful lot of Western media just accept whatever they say without question.
Without questioning, all right.
So, you know, for instance,
without any checks and balances.
Yeah, well, without checks and balances, but also without checking whether the information they've been given is true or not.
Okay, the veracity of the information. Yeah.
I'll give you one example. Tun Mahathir, as you know, has been very fond of saying again and again and again that Malaysia has become one of the top 10 corrupt countries in the world. Now, there's actually no basis for saying this, in fact, at all. There is no such list. And if anything, if someone did produce a list like that, certainly if you go by Transparency International's lists, Malaysia is in about the top third for countries that are least corrupt. So, and I think if you look at Chedet, he's somewhere he's attempted to justify this claim, and he's put links to different pieces, but none of them back it up.
Yes.
I mean, I'd really like to see some evidence for this, but he keeps saying that it's true. The Guardian interviewed him the other day, and he mentioned this in the interview, and the journalist did not challenge him. So that's then gone out there in the Guardian, and there will be plenty of people who read the Guardian, just as there are plenty of people here who believe Tun Mahathir when he says this, but actually it's not true at all. And I think that's something that worries me about this election, is that there's been a lot of propaganda put out there that is false, it is fake news, it is lies. I mean, that top 10 corrupt list is one of those, and you know what worries me about that too, I think I say, well look, Tun Mahathir must know that this is not true. So he either knows he's telling a lie, or he doesn't know he's telling a lie. And I'm not sure which is more worrying in someone who's being put up as a candidate to be Prime Minister. I mean, just as another example of that, with 1MDB, you know, we know that opposition people have been going around saying, you have to pay GST because the money's lost all this money on 1MDB, and GST is raising the money that's gone missing.
Yes.
And we know that's not true. We know that GST is there to cushion the impact of the fall in oil and gas prices, basically. I mean, it's there partly for that, but also partly as a very necessary broadening of the tax base. You know, like the vast majority of countries in the world have something like that. I mean, you two correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, actually the only government money that's ever gone in, government money that has gone into 1MDB is 1 million ringgit to begin with. I think they gave a soft loan to 1MDB, which was then repaid. Now, I'm not going to go into 1MDB, that's whatever it is, but they are repaying their debts themselves. So we know that GST is not going to 1MDB.
It's not being used for that.
But people are going around saying this, that they must know that they are telling lies. And I think if you have a situation like that, that's it's very bad for politics in general, because if we can't agree on common facts, you know, if I say to you, look, that's a chair, and you say, no, it's a TV, how can we have a discussion?
Yes,
you
of
know?
course.
But just going back to international media, I wanted to give you an example, actually. It's a kind of ironic example of how people have reacted to Malaysia in the Western media. In 2003, just around the time that Tun Mahathir stood down, I wrote a piece about him for The Spectator magazine in the UK. I don't know if you know The Spectator, but it's a kind of leading conservative weekly magazine there. Now, the editor at the time was Boris Johnson, who's now the UK Foreign Secretary. And we'd been talking about the idea of my writing something about Tun Mahathir for a bit. Then Tun gave his speech to the OIC. Do you remember that one? That kind of got quite a lot of attention around the world.
Yes.
And Boris Johnson called me up and said, "Okay, write the piece now. How soon can you do it? Monday or whatever, you know." And basically, it was a piece defending him, because of course he came in for a lot of criticism over the OIC speech, particularly when what he said about Jews, if you remember. So this piece came out on a Thursday. The very next day, I, by name, and The Spectator magazine were attacked in the Daily Telegraph newspaper.
Wow.
Now, what was really extraordinary about that is The Spectator and The Telegraph are sister publications.
Okay.
And in the main leader column, we were attacked. And in fact, one of the Telegraph leader writers, who was an associate editor of The Spectator, he threatened to resign as associate editor of The Spectator because they published this piece I'd written defending Tun. So that gives you the kind of it's not that the Western media are kind of against the whole idea of Malaysia per se, but they have had they've started from a very negative point of view on BN, and I'd say there's lots of other things that they just get wrong, you know, because they just don't understand this country. You'll hear sometimes people who are criticising BN, they say, "Oh, and this NEP and pro-Bumiputra policy," they'll say, "This is like apartheid in South Africa," which is a ridiculous comparison.
Yes, they went overboard.
It's very overboard.
Yeah.
But I think that doesn't mean that everybody or every paper that writes these kind of publications is doing so maliciously. It may be that they don't understand enough. You know, they haven't spent enough time here, and they'll often fly people in. I remember one paper did a profile of Dato Sri Najib 2 or 3 years ago, and he was this paper's Asia editor. So they always thought, okay, you know, he's our most authoritative guy. We'll get him to do it. And I had a long conversation with him on the phone, and I thought, you don't really know this country. You know, you may be an expert on Japan, but your knowledge of Malaysia is really very thin, and you're going to be the one who's going to do this profile, which will then seem to be very authoritative because it's in this big newspaper. Just as an aside, one of my early tutors in Malaysian politics, actually right from I think the very first time I came out here, was the late Tan Sri Abdullah Ahmad,
Okay.
who became a very dear friend.
I see.
And he, my time chatting with him right from the start, he'd say, "Yeah, don't believe everything here. It's actually like this. It's like this. You've got to know all this kind of stuff."
Right.